Welcome to the 6th episode of our video series, Oh, the Places God Goes, and to this familiar story from the 17th chapter of Luke. As Jesus made his way toward Jerusalem, he crossed over the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 men, all lepers, met him. They kept their distance but raised their voices, calling out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." Taking a good look at them, Jesus said, "Go, show yourselves to the priests." They went, and while they were still on their way, became clean. One of them, when he realized that he was healed, turned around and came back, shouting his gratitude, glorifying God. He kneeled at Jesus' feet, so grateful he couldn't thank him enough. And he was a Samaritan. Jesus said, "Were not 10 healed? Where are the 9? Can none be found to come back and give glory to God except this outsider?" Then he said to him, "Get up, on your way. Your faith has healed and saved you." Before I begin, I need to give credit for the idea of this video to a United Church of Christ pastor by the name of Dudley Rose. To begin, I need to go back to 2008, where my dear colleague, Pastor Matthew Peterson, won 2nd place at the World Board Gaming Championships, playing something called Puerto Rico. And as if that wasn't enough, my friends, in 2010, he then won 3rd place in the world playing Vegas Showdown. And yes, he has the plaques to prove it, a world championship board gamer in our very midst, my friends. However, not to be outdone, I thought I might share with you my own humble accomplishment from some 30 years earlier, 1978 in fact, winning the Monopoly competition at my then local pub, the Hollybush on Hampstead Hill in North London. Although, sadly, I cannot produce a plaque to verify my win, so you're just going to have to take my word that it really happened. And let's face it, what's more impressive? 2nd in the world at something called Vegas Showdown, or 1st in North London at the game of Monopoly. I mean, who hasn't played Monopoly? The best-selling board game of all time, played by over 1 billion people since its official patent in 1935. Although, interestingly, when you look at the history of this world-famous board game, the game itself was actually devised back in 1903 by a practicing Quaker called Elizabeth Phillips. Oh, the places God goes. But get this irony of ironies, she devised the board game as a teaching tool to show the evils of having a monopoly, to show how dangerous it can be for one person to become so wealthy on the backs of bankrupting others. And of course, the irony is that's exactly the opposite of what the game has become for us. These days, Monopoly is a symbol for success, a symbol of what it means to live the American dream, to accumulate property, to maximize your wealth, to collect income, and yes, to be competitive. You have to bankrupt your competition to win the game. And doesn't that sound a lot like life? Doesn't that sound like the kind of free market within which we live and breathe? I mean, I hate to push this analogy too far, but isn't it interesting to note that Elizabeth Phillips made room for a jail space on her Monopoly board game? That seems to assume that those who are hungry to win the game will perhaps end up behind bars. And yes, just like in real life, going to jail in Monopoly is a very bad deal, because when you're in jail, you're not in the game. You can't collect rent. You certainly can't buy any property. And in fact, unless you're willing to hand over cold, hard cash, you're going to stay in jail for the whole of your sentence. Unless you happen to have a get-out-of-jail-free card. You remember that card? It was always the one you wanted to keep in your hand, the one you needed to have in your back pocket so that you could rejoin the game without missing a beat. Which brings me to Pastor Dudley Rose and his thoughts about this story. He writes, "Monopoly came to mind when I thought of the 10 lepers that Jesus encountered in the region between Samaria and Galilee. Or to be more precise, being in jail in the game of Monopoly came to mind, because lepers were feared and shunned in Jesus' day. They were out of the game, in jail, so to speak. And no, they weren't behind bars, but in some ways, they were worse off. No one, family, friends, business associates, no one wanted anything to do with them. They couldn't work, they couldn't go to market, they couldn't even go home. People threw stones at them. Lepers could not come within the walls of the cities. They had to stay at stipulated distances from others. They could go to synagogue, but they were restricted to a set-off place, and they had to come before everyone else came and leave after everyone else left. And that way no one would have to look at them, or worse, come into contact with them. Lepers were not in the game. They were in jail, and in their case there was no way to bind themselves out. And yet, remember, my friends, in this story, it's to these people that Jesus came. Oh, the places God goes. The lepers, the outcast, the sick, the lame, the broken. To all those who don't stand a chance of playing the game, let alone winning the game. And Jesus simply tells them, show yourselves to the priests. That's all he says. He doesn't touch them, he doesn't lay hands on them, he doesn't anoint them with oil, he doesn't make them jump through hoops or offer requirements. All it says is that Jesus told them to go and show themselves to the priests, and as they went, they were miraculously made clean. They were healed of their hideous disease, or as Pastor Rose puts it in Monopoly terms, they were given a get-out-of-jail-free card. He continues. They were handed back their lives. Now they could throw the dice again. They could buy property, collect rent, build hotels. They could pass go and collect $200. Oh yes, they were back in the game, and down the road they went, dancing a jig, singing, "We're back, we're back." Yes, my friends, oh, the places God goes. And thanks be to God for the gift we too are handed in our baptism, our own permanent get-out-of-jail-free card, released from our bondage to sin, forgiven for what we have done and what we have left undone, freed from our guilt and freed from our shame. And yes, we too should be like that one leper, the Samaritan. We too should return again and again to God and give thanks for the gift of grace that allows us to get back in the game. That's truly a wonderful thought, is it not? Truly a wonderful message. But you know something? While pondering this text, it dawned on me, this Samaritan cannot do what Jesus is asking him to do. He can't ever get back into the game, even if he wants to, because he's a Samaritan, because he's not a Jew. The reality is that no matter what the circumstance, a Samaritan would never be welcome at the synagogue, let alone be allowed to show himself to the priest. That was a matter of temple law. No foreigners allowed, period. And that reality begs the question, what's really going on here? What's this story really all about? I mean, is it about remembering to say thanks, which is something I've often preached about before? Or is it about the importance of giving thanks back to God, which is something I've also preached on, recognizing that God is the true source of all that we have and all that we are in life? Or is there something even bigger at work here? For ultimately at heart, does the fact that this Samaritan has now become whole mean that the story is really about changing something deeper and more meaningful about ourselves? Could the story be about changing the very way we play the game of life itself? Could it be about finding a different way to play the game? Even perhaps about finding a different game to play, a different way to live? Oh, the places God goes. You see, just like in our own society, Jesus understands his society to work a lot like the game of Monopoly does. The idea being to come out on top, to be the winner, to play the game ultimately to win the prize. And yes, hopefully we can do that fair and square. Hopefully we can do that by playing by the rules without going to jail, without taking anyone else out along the way. And yet the very nature of competition means there are going to be winners and losers. I mean, the very concept of having a game in the first place means that somebody's going to win, which means somebody's going to lose. So how about this? What if the get out of jail free card is actually an opportunity for us to be freed from the game itself? How about if this grace and peace that Jesus offers to us is found in freeing us from playing the game of life the way we've always played it before? Instead of looking out for number one, to look out instead for our neighbor. Instead of feathering our own nest, so to speak, to reach out instead, to purposefully reach out to the outcast, the leper, the social pariah, to the person who has no hope of playing the game, no matter how much they might want to. Or in other words, my friends, the text is ultimately encouraging us to play the game of life in a profoundly different way, because we have to, because we have no choice, because it's how it's played as a follower of Jesus Christ, as people who've been set free to play a new and different game, as people who have been set free from our very selves, set free for others. Oh, the places God goes. Amen.